The Auburn Tigers host the Ole Miss Rebels. What's at stake?
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into this crossover edition of Locked On Auburn and Locked On Ole Miss. I'm Zach Blackerby, host of Locked On Auburn. He is Stephen Willis, the Stephen Willis over at Locked On Ole Miss. Thank you so much for making our shows your first listen every single day. The Auburn Tigers host the Ole Miss Rebels Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Thank goodness it's at 6 o'clock, not 8 o'clock. Stephen, this game feels different than I thought it would a few weeks ago. A lot of that has to do with Ole Miss losing their last two, Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. But I still think Ole Miss is a solid team. And what better way for them to turn things around than to go on the road and beat the number one team in college basketball? The opportunity is there.
Yeah, it's like what is it? Herb Brooks from Miracle on Ice is like from great moments come from great opportunity. That's what Ole Miss has Wednesday night, and it's not going to be anything near a sure thing. And right now, Ole Miss has kind of been sputtering. They lost by double digits to Mississippi State at home. They were down by 19 points against Vanderbilt. They are not in a good place at the moment. But with a Chris Beard team, they always have the ability to jump them and strike you. They're kind of like a rattlesnake. They play defense. Now, I do think Auburn's a horrible matchup for Ole Miss. Janai Broome by himself makes that team with the outside shooters that they have, and the way Ole Miss plays defense, problematic. But hey, if Ole Miss can win that game and go over to Auburn and get that win, they were within like 5 points in Oxford at the end, and Auburn went on a late run. If Ole Miss could close it out, I mean, that would be a big monumental win and the best win in Chris Beard's tenure.
Yeah, I was looking at the numbers from the first matchup earlier this year, and I kind of forgot that Auburn won that by 10, because like when I think about that, like it doesn't feel like a 10-point victory, but that's how a lot of college basketball is, fouling at the end, or it only takes, a 5-0 run at the end of a game to make it look different than it actually was. But this was a physical game. It was contentious. And I mean, I don't know, that was a round where Ole Miss was probably playing its best ball of the season. Call me out if I'm wrong on that, but I do think they're capable of getting back to that. Auburn's dealing with something now, and I think the fan base is feeling it more than this team is. And this team will never admit it, but like the level of pressure around being number one for so long, and this team kind of keeps getting doubted by national media and all of that, despite what their resume is. It's the best resume in college basketball. I do think pressure plays a factor in all of this. And for whatever reason, Stephen, this Auburn team down the stretch hasn't been as good at home in Neville as they have been on the road. Does that make me want to pick Ole Miss in this game? No, but it does make me say we cannot write off Ole Miss from the Auburn side of this.
I will say this. If Ole Miss has a lead with 5 minutes to go in the game, there's a real chance Auburn loses this game because of what you just said with the pressure.
Okay.
Because down the stretch, it's going to get more and more and more on the Auburn team. Now, the problem for Ole Miss is going to be getting to the point where they have a lead with 5 minutes to go in the game.
Sure.
But I mean, the pressure has to be there. Auburn is the best team in the conference that everybody's saying is the best conference in the history of conferences.
Right.
So that's pretty heady area, and you have to think of a lot of pressure. Now, Auburn does not seem like the type of a team with what goes on with them and everything to where pressure is going to necessarily affect them.
Yeah.
I mean, they seem like a pretty loose group of players. So I don't see a situation to where they will fold, but you get towards the end of the game and you have them down a little bit with them thinking about what's going on. And all of a sudden Yale starts going through their minds and things like that. And all of the pressure on top of everything else. Yeah, I think you would have a chance, and that might be kind of their blind spot of the Auburn team this year.
You guys just can't help yourselves. Anytime I do a crossover with another show, you guys always bring up Yale somehow. Every single time. Doesn't matter if it's you or Luke or whoever. You guys always bring up Yale. And I think I'd do the same if I were y'all. So I don't blame you. I don't blame you. As far as what's at stake in this game, I mean, Auburn is in a spot where they feel like they should be able to close out this run to winning the SEC regular season championship. They've got a 2-game lead over Alabama and Florida. And of course, they play Alabama in the regular season finale. Ole Miss plays Florida. Auburn fans will be pulling for Ole Miss when you guys head to Gainesville to wrap up the season. But what would you say is at stake here for Ole Miss? Why does Ole Miss need this win so badly?
Seeding. At this point, Ole Miss is playing for seeding in the NCAA tournament, and you want to wear a white jersey whenever you're playing a, quote, home game in the NCAA tournament. So you're playing against a, quote, lesser team in the bracket. Sure. If Ole Miss goes on a skid and loses at Auburn, they lose against Oklahoma, they lose against Tennessee, they lose against Florida with a 6-game losing streak going into the SEC tournament, Ole Miss could wind up as a 9 or a 10 or an 11 seed playing against a pretty good basketball team, and there's no vibes around this program. This is going to be imperative for Ole Miss to get a little bit of swagger back and what they had against Kentucky. That first half against Kentucky was just absolutely beautiful basketball. If Ole Miss can get back to that point, right, they'll be all right. But they have to do it, and this is an incredibly rough stretch they're about to go down.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about that before we clicked record. For Ole Miss, their final 4 games at Auburn, versus Oklahoma, versus Tennessee, and at Florida. I mean, most teams like Final Four at this point are brutal just because that's what the conference is, but this has to be among the toughest. I mean, that's an insane Final 4 games minus Oklahoma.
Yeah, it's a situation. On my show on Monday, I talked about the must-win for Ole Miss on their schedule, and it's weird with Ole Miss being in the tournament, having a must-win game. That Oklahoma game's a must-win game. You need some good vibes. Yeah. You need some feel-good going into the SEC tournament.
Yeah. Who wins this game? What should we expect? Our predictions next, right here on this crossover edition of Locked on Auburn and Locked on Ole Miss. Today's show brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Steven, can you imagine playing daily fantasy anywhere other than with our friends at Prize Picks?
No, not at all.
No. And what's so crazy about Prize Picks is right now you can play your first $5 lineup and you get $50. You don't even have to win the $5 entry. You get it no matter what. I don't think it's the best business model for Prize Picks, but that's where we are. We are. With Prize Picks, you can pick more or less on at least 2 player projections. And if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. It's fast and easy, and it keeps everything exciting. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege. You get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Locked On College for $50 instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Auburn hosts Ole Miss, Neville Arena, 6 p.m. Central Time is that tip. Once again, can't stress enough. Thank goodness it's not the 8 o'clock game. I think Auburn wins this game, Steven. I mean, I don't think that's shocking. I think most people are going to pick the Tigers in this one, but I do think Ole Miss makes it interesting. Is that reflective in the final score? I don't know. It could be like a similar matchup where was it 92-82 in the first? Yeah, 92-82 in the first one. It wouldn't shock me if we saw a similar line on Wednesday night.
Yeah, and the key in this game is going to depend on Auburn's outside shooting. If everybody remembers that Ole Miss Auburn game, it was the 3-point shot. I think Auburn shot 55% or something like that outside the arc. And that's the reason Auburn was probably likely able to win that game, because Ole Miss actually played pretty well. And it was a spurt of like 7 points at the end of the game that took it from like 3 or 5 points to 10. Yeah. So I think you're right. It could be a similar looking thing. Ole Miss fans are just hoping the basketball team gets a little bit of that mojo and a little bit of that swagger back. And sometimes Ole Miss was coming off a 3-game losing streak the last time I think they played Auburn or something like that. They were wanting to just play well. They wanted to show well. Yeah. And they were kind of focused on themselves, and they were actually able to put that together and ran off a winning streak after that and just completely drubbed Kentucky just immediately after Auburn. I think Ole Miss is looking for a similar type situation. It's not the result of the game that Ole Miss is really interested in. It's the way they look. You don't need a situation to where you just fall into an avalanche in the first 5 minutes of the game, which in Neville is a possibility. But if you can keep it close and have a similar type game, I think Ole Miss would take that.
Yeah, I think so too. Especially with what you have left. And like, I just can't imagine Ole Miss's seeding changing that much unless they just went on an absolute tear. So, like, does this matter that much in the grand scheme of things? I don't know. Another thing, like, Janai Broome was still kind of nursing the return from that ankle injury when they played in Oxford. We kind of saw a healthy Janai Broome, or what looked to be a healthy Janai Broome, with the offense going through him last game. He scored 31 against Georgia over the weekend. Do they do that against Ole Miss? And I've always said, like, the outside shooting is fun, but I think the offense going through Janai Broome is what can win this team a championship potentially. And so how often do they go to Janai Broome, I think, will be a big storyline coming out of this.
And the way Ole Miss plays defense, when you go inside, they collapse so hard, there's going to be open 3-point shots.
Sure.
And if you run through Janai Broome, you probably are going to shoot well outside the arc just because you're going to have some open looks.
Yep. You got a score prediction you want to throw out there, Steven?
I think 85-72.
Okay. Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely Auburn.
Yeah, I'm going to go like 90-80. I think there's a lot of points in this one. So we'll see. Steven, for all the Auburn folks listening, I know that they know where to find you because it almost seems like there's as many Auburn fans watching you every day. But how can Auburn folks check out everything that you've got going on?
You can check me out on the YouTube channel at Locked On Ole Miss. Wherever you get your podcast, you can also check me out on the ABC 24 webpage out of Memphis. As everybody's about to find out, there's going to be a little bit of an expansion happening going on within the network. But, me and Zach don't get to talk very much anymore. It's like we never play football anymore, and that's not cool.
What was Sankey thinking with all this? Yeah. You finally have this natural blooming rivalry between Auburn and Ole Miss, and they're like, okay, don't let them play anymore.
Yeah, it made no sense. And a basketball crossover is great, and that's fun. And Bruce Pearl and Chris Beard has a chance in the next couple of years to be pretty interesting.
Agreed.
Yeah, but Hugh Freeze and Ole Miss, I mean, that should have been a no-brainer.
No kidding.
Yeah.
No kidding. Yeah, Auburn and Ole Miss need to play football as many years as possible. No question about it. So be sure to make Locked On Ole Miss or Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Please like the video and please subscribe to both of our channels. It really goes a long way. For Stephen Willis of Locked On Ole Miss, I'm Zach Blackerby, host of Locked On Auburn, and this has been a crossover edition of Locked On Auburn and Locked On Ole Miss, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.